All right, everybody. We've had a little bit of a firestorm on Facebook this week as we got ready for this particular topic. It's everything from dress codes to purity culture. It's all about the patriarchy. We are the Libertarian Moms, and this is Parenting Porcupines. So quick shout out to those of you who are joining us live. We appreciate you. You can leave comments on Facebook. You can leave comments on YouTube. And if we are able to see them, we'll be responding to them. If you've got questions, we're glad to bring you in as part of the conversation. If you're checking this out after it's already been recorded, still send us your notes, send us your thoughts. Everything that we're doing here is about creating a conversation around parenting and healthy families, and sort of applying that libertarian principles to some of those things. It's not a political broadcast, right? It's really more about being moms. So how are you, Jess?
Good. Tired.
Tired? You've been painting all day, yeah?
I've been painting, yes. So
today's topic is patriarchy, and there's a couple of disclaimers. I've got them out on the blog. It's parentingporcupines.com. If you haven't looked out there at the show notes yet, let me put that up here so you can see it. Go out there, grab that, take a look at it while we're working through some of these ideas, because you'll get a little bit of better idea of some of the links that we use to build a little bit of the research into the conversation. But the first thing is to understand that patriarchy is a social construct. And what I mean by a social construct is that it's not faith, right? It's not a Christian construct because it exists in non-Christian culture, right? So it's not about a certain kind of faith or a certain kind of religion. It's also not an American thing because it's in Asian cultures and African cultures and Middle Eastern cultures. Patriarchy is a social construct that values men over women. It values boys over girls, and it relegates women and children into a lesser position after father and husband. Patriarchy is very much real, and identifying it and wanting to reject it in your home, in your relationships with your children, it doesn't mean that you don't value men. It doesn't mean that you don't love your male partners, that you don't love your male friends and your male children, or that you want to be asexual or homosexual. Identifying patriarchy as a thing is simply, this is it and it's a fact. And how are we going to live with it, or hopefully in some way dismantle it? And the third disclaimer is that patriarchy is not just damaging to women and girls, but it's a source of toxic masculinity. And it puts an unfair burden on men to provide, to lead, to make decisions on their own without the benefit of partnership with their wives and their families. So we think patriarchy is damaging to everybody. And that said, there are dozens of manifestations of patriarchy that are so damaging that can be handicapping to our children. And so in this episode, we're only going to be able to take on a few of them, but we're taking on one specific one, courtesy of our special guest, Cayce LaCorte, whose viral TikTok rant on virginity being a construct of the patriarchy got her noticed by, among others, BuzzFeed. So we're going to welcome Cayce into the studio. Welcome, Cayce LaCorte.
Hello. How are you guys doing today?
We're doing great. We were talking about bringing you on this show a lot earlier because you've been part of some of our libertarian politics here in South Carolina for a little bit. Give our listeners, our viewers, an idea of who you are and where you're from and kind of what your background is.
My name is Cayce LaCorte. I currently reside outside Charleston, South Carolina. I've been a stay-at-home mom for like 14 years and just recently joined the job force again. I'm a writer. I have a 3-book contract with Falstaff Publishing for my mythology retelling that I'm working on. Yes. And I'm a little addicted to TikTok. It's a little unhealthy. I'm aware. I am nothing if not self-aware. So, yeah. And things kind of exploded after I went on one of my rants, and I've just been kind of riding that wave and just continuing to talk about the way that men and women can exist better together and more advantageous to both of us.
There's a link in the show notes on parentingporcupines.com to get to that TikTok rant, and it's not very long. So if you want to go get it and take a look at it real quick, you can do that. But
it's maybe like 30 seconds. Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty short. But so there's 3 topics I thought we could talk about as far as this patriarchy thing is concerned. And we usually just kind of round robin where we just kind of go what our thoughts are on each of them. So we'll start with you, Jess, with this very first one, which is about this concept of purity culture. Oh, no, you know what? Let's start with Cayce on this, because this is the idea, the biological idea of virginity, right, is a thing. But you make the point in your TikTok video that the idea of virginity is this patriarchal construct that assigns value to a girl based on whether or not she's pure. And that's what this purity culture thing is out there floating around. So can you talk a little bit about that? Like, you've decided to reject that in teaching with your daughters. And I guess just kind of riff on that for a second.
Well, I have 5 daughters, and it's really just the absence of teaching it. I don't make it a thing. It's not something we talk about. And when they get older and we do talk more openly about sex like we do now, we always have somewhat, but I try and explain to them why it exists and why it's so prevalent in movies and television and media, and how it doesn't have to apply to them unless they choose for it to apply to them. I also let my children go to different churches with friends and explore their own faiths. And I've just been very open of figuring yourself out. But I think it kind of goes back to forever, women, we were property. We haven't even been allowed to work or make our own money for really, it hasn't been that long when you think about it. Mm-hmm. And knowing a woman was pure was, for making sure your child was yours. So making sure the heir was solid and the bloodline continued and yada, yada, yada. But I just don't think it has any place in our modern society. If that is something that your faith dictates to you, then by all means, go with it. But I don't think it needs to be a societal norm. And there's so much pressure put on women and young girls to be virtuous, to be pure, to be pure for your husband. But at the same time, we're teaching young men to be, virile and get the girls and all these things. And so it's really funny how we're expecting these two things to coexist. And then we're surprised when you have sexual assault and you have young men pushing for things and not understanding consent, because we're teaching two opposite things to our same children, a lot of times in the exact same household.
Yeah. So we need a whole other episode to talk about rape culture and bring that conversation in. But you did mention something that I think is important, because Jess is a boy mom, right? So when we think of your boys, Jessica, and this concept of patriarchy and what it might do to them and how it might suspend some of their abilities in terms of having these open relationships and relying on women, relying on their partners, relying on other people, because they do have this sort of sense of they have to be in charge, or they have to be, something that maybe is unfair. Can you talk a little bit about that in your household?
We don't teach our boys that way, I don't think, and we don't model that either. I mean, we are pretty equal partners, Michael and I. So I don't think that's something that we demonstrate as being important, that the man be head of household, traditionally speaking. But what we talk to our boys about is not purity, it's modesty. And so I think there's a line there that you can value modesty without expecting purity. And so, and our boys are instructed to always treat women with dignity and respect. Mm-hmm. So I guess I've never really thought about it very much.
I want to pick up the modesty thread, though, because I have a 13-year-old daughter, and Kasie and I have had this conversation a little bit about the clothing that's available for 13-year-old girls, the bathing suits that we see other girls wearing. This conversation shows up at the swimming pool, me and some of the other moms, I couldn't believe this girl was wearing this bathing suit that's clearly made for a 22-year-old woman, and she's 14, right? So I think there's this concept around modesty too, and this hits on that dress code conversation, where is modesty something that is a cultural value that we're perpetuating in order to preserve purity, right? Or is it a matter of self-respect, right? And thinking about whether or not what you're wearing properly demonstrates your sense of self-worth, right? So I don't know if you guys want to weigh in on that a little bit.
Yeah, I actually had to check myself recently. My daughter, my 16-year-old, has her own job, makes good money, and she is on buying stuff from Amazon and Shein because she has no bills. So I've had to kind of check myself with some of the things she's wearing, because my husband is very much of the mindset of, oh my God, don't wear that. And I'm like, why? What is it about that outfit exactly? Tell me. And he's just, it's too. And I'm like, she likes the corsets, and it kind of makes her boobs a little jacked up, but she's covered. she's covered and she looks adorable. Like she looks like the way I wish I could have dressed when I was her age. And it's like not me like projecting any of that on her. She just looks really cool. Yeah. And so I kind of, the mom in me is like, oh, maybe we should rethink. And then I'm like, why? Why am I thinking that way? Is it am I inadvertently sexualizing a child? Am I putting adult sexual preconceptions? And I know the society may look at her that way, but my focus has been to check my own reasoning, my own thoughts I'm trying to correct, and also to talk to her why she's dressing this way. I always use the phrase, I don't want you to be performative. I don't want you to be looking this way for someone else, for look at me, for attention, for trying to be sexy. I was like, if you are wearing this because you honestly just really like it and you think you look cute and you're happy, I'm 100% on board. But if for a minute you think maybe you are trying to get attention or do something else, then you need to, check your own motives.
So I think that's important too, because you're talking about having a complicated conversation. It's a dress conversation. What are you wearing and why are you wearing this, right? And it's hard to have these complicated conversations. And Jessica and I talk about this a lot, just about week in and week out, talking to your boys about things that like maybe it's uncomfortable to talk to them about it, but it's your job to do that. It's your job to be honest about it and to pull back the layers of this. And I think that's why I got so angry. If you're looking at the show notes on parentingporcupines.com, you'll see there's a link there about purity culture and purity rings and parents giving their daughters these rings, getting them to promise in exchange for these rings that they'll save themselves for marriage. And this girl had a very sort of complicated understanding of sexuality because of it. And there's research that shows that children who are sort of suppressed by that have a complicated understanding of sexuality. And to me, that is when that gets put into the conversation, you're going to save yourself for marriage. We don't have to talk about it. We don't have to talk about STDs. We don't have to talk about orgasms. We don't have to talk about, consent. We don't have to talk about any of that stuff because you're not going to deal with any of it until you get married. And then it'll be your husband's problem, not mine, and I will have done my job, right? To me, that is the laziest type of mothering I've ever heard of in my life. You've got to have that conversation with your daughter and with your sons about what does it mean to be intimate with another human being? What are you going to be feeling? How confused are you going to be? When they start crying, they're going to cry, right? They're going to be messy about it. Like, get in the mess. Be willing to be part of that conversation, and don't expect that because you put a ring on your daughter's finger and made her promise that she was never going to have any of these complicated emotions, right? I guess that's probably where I get pretty frustrated about it, and I do get a little soapboxy about it, and about the dress code too. I can definitely get soapboxy about the dress code. You guys have heard my dress code stories. So let's talk a little bit, because I know we introduced this with the idea of patriarchy. Let's talk about the partners in your homes. So you're co-parenting, right? Your partner, does your partner have the same sort of perspective and view? In case you made a little mention about Joe being a little bit more conservative, but are you guys having an open conversation about this? And just to talk a little bit about Michael's approach as well.
Yeah, we're trying. I give him some leeway because he's the father of 5 daughters. And he's Coast Guard, and he's been gone for literally half their lives off and on. So I try and not get to you should and you need to, and try and hear him out and respect his concerns, because they're not crazy. They're very, very normal. But I'm trying to do something a little more abnormal. I'm trying to be a little more open. We talk about sex and periods, and it's not like we have sit down conversations. Like we're literally at El Jalapeno eating burritos talking about our periods, and he is so not here for it. And I was like, there are 6 women in this household. 4 of us are menstruating. I'm gonna need you to get on board.
Yeah.
Like,
well, you're just
we're going to normalize
it, right?
this. Yes. Yeah. We're going to normalize this. And this is something you don't get a vote on. But with the other things, I do try and be a little more sensitive because he came from a very strong female-led household, but with very traditional views. So.
Gotcha. What about you, Jess? How's Michael coping with this idea, these boundaries conversations, these consent conversations, the treat women with respect conversations? Are you guys singing from the same songbook here? Or?
Oh yeah, definitely. We don't really, I guess. Jackson is 12. So, and he actually does have a little girlfriend, and it's absolutely adorable. We met her last night. And he's so sweet to her, But, Caldwell's 9. So he thinks girls are cute and stuff, but he's into Minecraft and swimming. That's what he wants to do with his time. So those conversations haven't really gotten that in depth, I guess. I mean, more so with Jackson. As he went into middle school, we started having more conversations because that's the age that seems like kids start getting more curious and, those things start happening.
And the other kids are talking about it. So then your kids are hearing about it, whether you're talking about
all
it
the
or
time.
not.
That's all they talk about.
For sure.
It's like constant.
But Michael is very old fashioned in that he opens doors. He lets me, walk in first. He always opens the door for me. He opens the car door for me. He helps old ladies, if they need help. So it's behavior that he's modeled. It's not necessarily behavior because when we have discussions, the discussions usually happen with me. Like it's usually me, though I'm the one that's talking.
Yeah.
But his reinforcement of those expectations for our boys are modeled behavior.
Yeah.
It's things that they're seeing him do. For instance, he always thanks me for making dinner. I don't think my husband has ever gotten up from the dinner table without thanking me for the meal that I've prepared. Yeah. So they see that and they've learned how to appreciate women and the things that women do and whatever that is.
And I think we've talked a little bit about this too. Charlie and I have, we're non-traditional gender roles in our house. Charlie does all the grocery shopping. He does all the cooking. He's a fantastic cook, right? Today he smoked ribs and he smoked macaroni and cheese with jalapenos and bacon. Ooh. And holy crap, is it amazing?
That sounds amazing.
I'll be there in an hour and a half.
I mean, he's just really, really talented, and he just really enjoys that. He cares for our family. He cares for our home. My grandfather was that way. And my papa, he took care of the house. He mopped and cleaned the bathrooms and stuff like that. So I come from a background where there weren't, strictly defined gender roles in the house anyway. And Charlie and I have a very easy partnership where the things that we are good at, the things that we like to do are the things that we do. And the things that we don't like to do or that we're not very good at, the other one can pick that up and carry that along. And so I think we're doing the same for Holly, is just kind of modeling that. But I want to go back to what you said, Jessica, about modeling how you want to be treated too, because part of this is you showing your boys how to stand, or maybe me showing Holly, or maybe Casey showing her girls this is how I expect to be treated by the partner in my life. And this is the affection that I'm willing to accept, right? And here's what I'm not willing to accept. And that's where those boundaries come in, I think. And some of that goes to dress code too, right? Where, how do you dress? How do you present yourself when you go to a fancy dinner, or fancy function, or when you go out to a rock concert or something like that? How do you flirt with other people? How do you accept touches from other people or hugs and things like that? A lot of that is modeling the kind of behavior that you would hope that your children demonstrate as well. So if you're super flirty and and hugging on people and very, sort of open and bubbly and things like that, that may be the behavior that your daughter sees as feminine behavior, right? I don't know. I'm not entirely sure because we're still just getting into this. I mean, she's 13. She's very much her own person though. So she's going to be her own person. And I just want her to be strong enough to recognize what healthy communication and healthy interaction looks like versus what that oppressive kind of negative, other people wanting to shame you or make you feel bad about yourself looks like, right?
Ooh, sorry, I think I messed that up. Sorry. I was like, I'm going to switch this. No, wait, stop. Okay. No, I think for me, it got a little bit easier because having so many girls, the younger girls get to hear the conversations with the older girls. And it's usually like we're in the minivan and we've picked them up from school. And, the 14-year-old or the 13-year-old or somebody's like, my friend did this. Oh, or this. Perfect example. My 13-year-old in school was like, oh, this girl is such a pick-me girl. She's such a teacher's pet. And I said, if she was a boy, she'd be called assertive and have leadership skills. I was like, so maybe you should re-examine. Do you just not like her? Is she not kind to you? I was like, or is she just, maybe she needs a little more validation. Maybe she needs a little more pep to kind of get going. I was like, and just not for nothing, everything in the world is trying to drag us down as women. We don't need to do it to each other.
Yeah.
And she was just like, I'm kind of judgy. And I was like, well, and I loved it. I was like, segue into a great conversation. I was like, okay. the fact that you are realizing something about yourself that's not a good thing and that you don't like is the first step to being able to change it. And there are so many people who cannot do what you just did. Yeah. She was just like, I'm a little bit judgy. And I was like, okay, so how do we try and go about doing a little better? And I was
We're going to raise the most self-aware children ever, right?
God, don't let them be as neurotic as I am.
I like the self-correction though, because again, going back to this idea of like trying to enforce purity culture on people, trying to enforce this idea that purity is better than not purity, that modesty is better than, open sexuality, like rather than trying to enforce those things upon them, allowing them to discover that for themselves, right? This becomes part of that free range parenting that we're such big fans of, right, Jess?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I guess this kind of goes back to the self-awareness of being judgy too. And I think part of this is going to stem from the firestorm on social media this week about this episode. But you can value modesty and respect that someone else doesn't. You can value purity and respect that someone else doesn't. I'm just going to throw that out there for all you other moms. So in case you need a reminder, we don't all have to think and believe the exact same way to be right. Because,
but here's where it gets toxic though, right? Is when another girl walks by, right? Here you are, group of moms standing around. Mm-hmm. Girl walks by in a bathing suit, and all of you go, "There's no way my daughter would wear that bathing suit. What does she think she's doing?" Blah blah. Just zip it.
She's not your daughter. She's not your
zero.
I openly correct people when they do that.
Yeah, and she's not competing with you for
people
men.
Don't
right?
love
She's
it.
30.
People don't love it, and I don't really care. Like there was a whole conversation on TikTok, once again about TikTok, about moms wearing thong or partial thong bikinis at water parks and places like that, and they were like, "Oh my God, ew, blah blah blah, you're a mom," and I'm like, she likes it. Is she actively trying to make you wear it? Like, is this something she's saying now you have to? Okay, then why do you care? Yeah. She looks great in it. Even if she doesn't look great, I don't care. It's not my body. Kids have seen a butt before. We have cable. Like, there's YouTube. Like,
that mom is not being obscene when she's wearing something that I can't wear. I mean, that would probably be the only reason that conversation would come out of my mouth would be because, my God, she's hot. How does that happen? Like, she's got
it would be 100% jealousy.
That's not
100%
okay.
jealousy.
100%. It would be 100% jealousy. And then I have to be self-aware enough to know that the only reason I want to criticize what that lady is wearing is because I'm not capable of pulling it off, or I don't have the confidence to pull it off for whatever reason. Like, I'll be like, oh, seriously. I remember when I went to get the Jeep, right? So it's been 5 years ago, I guess now. And I asked my girlfriends, I was like, do you guys think I could pull off a Jeep? And they're like, well, it's not a bikini. Like, of course you can drive.
It's not like shoulder pads.
Like, but I was like, but I always think of Jeep people as like hot, right? Like they're like riding around like
a hot Jeep girl. Like, drinking her White Claw.
Right. Like, I was like, this is a much younger vehicle. And they're like, you're a moron. It's just a car. Just go ahead and buy it. Right. But I think there's some of that too. Like, we have our own sense of our own insecurities, our own ideas about what we think how we think we look, right? Whether or not we think we're valued or are valuable. And we project that, I think, to an extent. And again, back to that self-awareness, right? If you can realize that, if you can say, the only reason I'm being critical of her is because I'm jealous, I need to just stop. I need to check myself, right? But it takes a tremendous amount of emotional maturity.
I'm neurotically self-aware. Like, I'm very self-aware. Like, I'm like, I'll be like, oh, I'm a bitch. And then I'm like, oh, that's why. Because I'm, I wish I could do that, or I'm jealous, or whatever. Like, I'm very, very self-aware.
I'm on the if you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all train. And I spend a lot of time thinking about what I want somebody to say that about me, or if I were in a conversation and I heard somebody say that, would I correct them if they said it? So I tend to try to temper as much as I can of some of those things.
Yeah, I'm more likely to not lash out, but like say something mean or nasty or whatever, more about something someone else is saying or doing versus not so much how they look, or you know what I mean? Like I'm real quick to be like, I think you're a bad person, and here's why. I made a PowerPoint presentation. But
there's a whole slide deck for you.
Yeah. But no, I try. I've been doing a lot better with catching myself on things that I'm like, it's envy, it's, it's jealousy, it's stuff like that.
One of the articles that I put in the show notes is written about a woman who experienced this purity culture as an Asian American Christian woman, and she was examining it in the Atlantic after the Atlanta massage salon shootings. And she was thinking about the sexualization of Asian women. And she's talking about how once she had given her life to Christ and had this concept that her own purity and her own abstinence was going to be a direct path to being saved and to being closer to God, while she felt good about that, it was perversely sexualized by people around her, in that because not only because she was pure, so to speak, but also because she was Asian. And then she sees it sort of manifest in this violence that happened to it in Atlanta. It's a fantastic article, but what it got me thinking about was, as you came up, right, as you were in your 20s, and you were, as you're dating and meeting people and this kind of thing, what are some of the words that were said about you or around you that you thought, could that be me? And are you aware of that vocabulary around your kids? Do these things change? I guess is what I'm saying. Is it the same old, same old? Are we still slut shaming? Are we still blaming the girl for how she's being treated? Things like that. Kasie, what do you think?
Not in my house. No, I grew up with my middle sister, I'm the youngest. My older sister is beautiful. Like, she's 5'10", thin, gorgeous, long hair. Like, she is just a very pretty girl and now a very beautiful woman. But she was always kind of had a tomboy vibe to her. And she had a horrible time in high school. She was sleeping with everybody's boyfriend. She was, it was for me as a younger sister, I kept trying to fight people, but she wouldn't let me. But it was me growing up seeing that. And then I will say into my 20s and early 30s, I still maybe thought some of those old stereotypes that we kind of learned, I tried to do better because I saw what happened to her. But I really think in my mid 30s was when I really realized how toxic it all was. And my daughters were just getting old enough to where I could start kind of doing better for them than was done for us. But I will say one thing quickly about the purity culture. It's the ceremonies creep me out.
Me too.
We're going to wear all white dresses and we're going to go with our fathers to dances and get rings. And it's very wedding-like. It's very incestuous vibes.
Yeah, it's a big deal. And you know what? The article that I read, the third one that's in the show notes on parentingporcupines.com, is about it peaked in the 90s. And this is where, in response to those people who are wondering why the Libertarian Moms are talking about this was creeping me out. So in the 90s, purity culture and the idea of abstinence-only sex education really got momentum in the government, right? And in 1996, Bill Clinton's Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Act, which was called the Workfare Act, passed with the rider Title V, Section 501B, which makes the ethereal status of virginity the standard for American teenagers. And over the next 5 years, $437.5 million in federal and state funding supported organizations that were willing to promote 8 ideological tenets, including teaches that a mutually faithful monogamous relationship in the context of marriage is the expected standard of sexual activity. So from a libertarian perspective, federal money is going out there to evangelize purity culture through sex education programs.
Which goes against every study and every common sense. Teenagers have sex. They're basically a bunch of hormones in a suit.
I want to sidebar because I want to clarify something. So that was Bill Clinton's initiative?
Yeah, that's in the 90s. It peaked
Ironical,
in the 90s.
Ain't it?
I mean, it's still happening now, but it peaked in the 90s.
But okay. All right.
Yeah, so
he was a beacon of monogamy and
right.
class.
That's the irony. That's the beauty of it, right? Is they just
what? If Trump can get the evangelical vote, anything can happen. So
that's what happened. So then Barack Obama comes in, and a lot of that was flipped, right? A lot of it went to more practical uses, right? More practical sex ed and that sort of thing. And then the Trump administration comes in, and Mike Pence goes around campaigning that he's going to bring it back, that he's going to start funding abstinence programs again. So Yeah, it's a political
Exhausting. That's exhausting.
lightning
Just to
iron, right?
think
Or
about.
what do you call it?
Lightning rod.
Yes, lightning rod. So that people, it's intentional to get people in a place where they can say, well, abstinence is best. You're not going to have sex till you're married. And now we don't have to talk about any of the messy things like STDs and unwanted pregnancies and what happens when your boyfriend sleeps with somebody else. And we don't have to have those conversations because you're not ever going to have sex, right? It gets you off the hook, I guess is what I'm saying. It's lazy and it gets parents off the hook. And I don't like it. I get like fired up angry about it.
No, not you.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You can see I'm already getting like red, like burning up over here. So one of our comments on YouTube is that it could be argued that purity is a way to prevent STDs, so it qualifies as a health issue. I do think that abstinence is a legitimate strategy for combating STDs. I just don't think it's a practical one, right? I think we absolutely need, more education around how to have the hard conversations with your kids. And so let's go back to that about valuing yourself too, because I think just one of the things that we were talking about before with the dress code and all that, we didn't necessarily pick on boys with the dress code. How does the dress code translate into sort of a boys versus girls? I mean, do you see it that way? Does it seem to blame girls for boys' problems or vice versa? What's your take on dress codes? Let's go with middle school dress codes.
Well, fortunately, our middle school has uniforms, so everybody has to dress the same way, which I think is great.
What are the uniforms?
They have to wear, so it's khaki. Pants or shorts, they have to be khaki, black. I think they can be navy. And then they have to wear a collared shirt. It has to be plain. And then they have a list of colors. It's a lot of colors. So it's pretty, it's not like the uniforms that you might think of. But it's uniformed across all kids too. And so I think that's really nice primarily because I don't have to think about what my kid's going to wear. I just
well, as
a girl in school, I always thought it was ridiculous because it was like I can't wear shorts that are, shorter than an inch above my knee, or I can't wear a tank top without a cardigan. Why? Like, what's the point of that? And while I do understand there being certain restrictions on dress in schools, just because kids are kids, boys are boys, girls are girls, and it could be a distraction. I can understand that point. But I do think it's taken a little too far. I do think that there are unnecessarily unfair parameters in place for the girls.
I think there's a standard, right? So the school wants to create a standard. Like in our school, it's from 12th grade all the way down. So that spaghetti strap thing, right, goes all the way down to kindergarten. So you have a little kindergarten girl with her little sundress on. And because it has spaghetti straps, she's not allowed to wear it to school. She's in kindergarten. She has no cleavage.
Ridiculous.
That happened to us multiple times.
Yeah, that happened to us as well. She's in kindergarten. She has no cleavage. This isn't a thing, right? But it's the standard. And now, again, we don't have to have conversations. We don't have to have hard conversations because we have a rule, right? And I do have a friend who's a teacher who said that her high school students would come in with showing lots of cleavage, showing, a G-string, showing, the bottom of their rear ends and all this kind of thing. And I thought, well, could somebody have a conversation with her about how does she feel about why she's dressed that way, right? Is this the only clothing she can afford, something that doesn't fit, right? In that case, like maybe there's an opportunity for outreach here, right? Could somebody have a conversation with her about whether or not she's doing what Kasie said? Is this performative, or are you genuinely comfortable and feel confident in what you're wearing? And then in that case, absolutely go for it, right? I mean, there's not any reason to limit other people's freedom simply because I feel uncomfortable with that. I would say the only place I get really judgy is at rock concerts. People think they can wear whatever they want to a rock concert. It's wild as hell.
They can. because they can. Go
they
for
come
it.
walking by, so I'm like, what is happening right now? When did we enter the BDSM? Like, somebody's dead.
It's actually a really interesting conversation on TikTok because they were talking about how a young man came on TikTok and was talking about how they say the dress code is so the boys don't get distracted. But he argued that's not the case at all, because he's like, we see them outside of school.
Yeah.
We see them hanging out on the street, going to the playgrounds. We go to the same stuff. We go to the movies together. We see them in their civvy clothes.
Yeah.
So he's like, they're dressing like that for the teachers. Because and a friend of mine is dating a male teacher, and she's like, oh, you don't understand. Those girls come in and they've got their cleavage all out, and he just inadvertently looks, and they're like, oh, you're staring at me. And I was like, but he looked. I was like, he looked.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it's something about like looking at a person and then looking at a person. There's a difference. And I'm not saying that's what he was doing, but I think it's a very interesting take on a conversation of, oh, we don't need to distract the boys. And the boys are like, we're good. You're just the old men who we're trying to keep safe, the girls safe from. So.
Or to prevent the possibility of exposure or liability or something to that effect as well.
Yeah.
So there's a passage in my most recent novel, Before Pittsburgh. Brian's talking about getting a job as an instructor at a university, and because he's not married, he mentions this like in his interview, as he's going to the interview. I'm worried that because I'm not married, they might not like having a young male instructor, because young female co-eds are likely to throw themselves at a young male instructor. And my editor Jody goes, and they will take advantage of it. You cannot have it the one way, that just those women are going to throw themselves at him. There are men who would then take advantage of that. She said, you've got to make sure you make that very clear. So this becomes, these gender roles, these gender polarities become risky for both parties. It's not just for women or men. And so what do? Well, in the Middle East, they put everybody in burqas and long capes, and, we're just not going to have this problem, right? Or here you say, well, we're free to express ourselves and dress the way we feel is appropriate, weather appropriate, right? And then we just check our own insecurities, and we check our own behavior, and respect that other people have boundaries and that we're not allowed to cross those boundaries.
But I would like to point out too, but like they still have rape in those countries where they wear the burqas. They still have assaults. Yeah. Back in when women were like, not showing any ankle, they were still assaults. Women were still treated as sexual objects. And that's where I think we kind of circle back to the patriarchy and our view in our society as women and the value that we hold. Because as long as we're seen as property, as sexual objects, as objects for gratification, as being there to serve another, whether it be the traditional housewife role or the Asian sex doll or all these other horrible stereotypes, as long as those exist, it doesn't matter what you wear. She's not dressed like a slut. You're just thinking like a rapist.
Oh, damn.
I mean, it's true.
Sorry, not sorry.
Don't be.
I don't think you should apologize for that at all.
Sorry, not sorry. Either. I don't think so either. I'm fully willing to support that as well. And I also think that from my daughter's point, so Holly brought up something I think that shows up a lot in some of the YouTube conversations in the LGBTQ plus community, where if this dress code conversation is about male sexuality toward females, how is it that our lesbians, for whom they are also sexually attracted to women, don't seem to have any trouble concentrating on their homework when the girl sitting next to them is wearing a strapless, whatever it is, right? So when we think about sexuality as being something that is pervasive, and the more we try to prevent it through abstinence education, through purity culture, the more it becomes like weeds popping up through the concrete, right? Instead of being open about it and having these hard conversations about it, we're trying to pretend that it doesn't exist. And that just makes it worse, right? That just perpetuates it.
Agreed. And also circling back to when I did the TikTok, the virginity myth TikTok, I was reached out to a lot of people in the queer community, and they were explaining to me, your first time, quote, in the queer community is, for some people, they have a different kind of standard. Because it might be when you were young and you had heteronormative cis sex, but your first time is more something you choose. it's your first consensual act with another person of your choosing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what they consider your first time. So I think that's a really interesting way to frame it.
Yeah. Well, and to back to Jessica's idea about the dress codes too, right? We're creating gender binary scenarios that really are irrelevant in this day and age, right? They're constrictive, and they force us to make rules that affect everybody, but aren't really relevant to everybody, right? So I think that's a piece of it too. Overall, in general, it's just oppression. Overall, it's just oppression. Call it anything else you want, but it's federally funded oppression.
And we circle back to the libertarians.
That's right. It's not just oppression, it's federally funded oppression. Yeah, so let's see, there's one other article in here. Okay, so here's a couple quotes from the article about the dress code. So one of them says, men's attire is used to demonstrate social power, responsibility, and achievement, whilst women's clothing is designed to draw attention to moral and physical development, which I thought was really interesting too, because it goes back to this conversation about if you put everybody in the exact same clothes, is it going to change who they are, whether or not they're leaders, whether or not they can express themselves, whether or not they can ask questions, whether or not they can learn, or is the clothing completely irrelevant?
I think it's irrelevant. I think we give it power as a society. The way someone dresses, you make kind of snap decisions about them based on what they're wearing. And but theoretically, if you put everyone in the world in the same like modern all black head to toe covered outfit, everyone with the same thing every day, I think that's where you kind of get back to the societal patriarchy standard, because there is still, it's so ingrained in our culture that it's not just the clothes. It's that women work now. Women, the majority of two-parent households, both parents work. But for some reason, I do feel like the majority of them, the women still come home from work, take care of the children, cook dinner, do laundry. All those homemaker expectations have stayed stagnant. And there was never a conversation. The majority of people I know, there's never a conversation between who's going to do what. That's just how it happened. Like you get married, you move in together, or you move in together and then get married, or however that happens. Those roles just seem to fall into place. And I think that's a really telling thing of that's how much force the patriarchy in society is putting on us. Like we don't even realize it's happening.
Yeah. And the women that defend it, right? There's a sense that it's so ingrained that they don't even realize they're suffering under it, right? Jess, you were going to add something to that?
Yeah, I think I was going to add just as a professional, someone who works in a professional environment. Typically, if you're going into a meeting, you're going to be, dressed to the nines or whatever. And if one thing we've learned from COVID, everyone working remotely, is that you don't even have to wear pants to be powerful, right? Like, I mean, I can't tell you how many conference calls I've had in my nightgown. Like,
yeah,
but, and maybe that, as companies learn that employees can work remotely and people are working remotely, maybe I'm hoping that's going to kind of change a little bit, like that expectation.
I have the same hope that with our remote workforce environment that we're going to get more toward the results that you're able to produce for your employer.
Yeah.
And we've talked a little about that before too. We've been at this for about 43 minutes, so we'll probably get ready to wrap up here in just a minute or so. I just wanted to touch back real quickly on this idea of the patriarchy in terms of the unintended consequences, right? So it's not just suppression for women, for girls, right? It also creates for boys unsustainable pressure to be something that it's really just not fair to ask them to be something that is not necessarily inherent to their own skills or their own interests, right? And that kind of thing as well. So I want to just really remind people that are watching this, when we attack the patriarchy, when we're saying like, let's get rid of it, we're not saying we don't want men in our lives. This is not an anti-boys or anti-men conversation. It's about the idea that this social construct is not good for anybody. It doesn't help any of us. us, and yet it's persistent, and it's so there, it's so omnipresent that sometimes we don't even realize that it's there. And it's not necessarily a faith-based structure because it happens in a lot of different religions, and it's not a cultural structure because it happens in a lot of different cultures too, not just American culture. It's very much about the evolution of human beings, right? And now I think, to Casey's point, we may have evolved past it, right? We may no longer have a need for it.
I mean, you look at babies, both a girl baby, boy baby, they will cry the exact same. At what point in them being raised is it not okay for the boy to cry anymore? At what point is that suppressed and like, okay, come on, suck it up?
Yeah.
You know, whereas the girl is allowed to feel her feelings and emote. And I think that speaks volumes. Like I'm curious. I know there's a study somewhere. I want to go find it where they've looked at that. At what age does that correction start happening in a lot of these homes? And it's definitely detrimental to boys. Like I feel awful. I was a waitress for a while after I went back to work, and I loved where I worked. And I worked with a lot of really great young men, and they had very, very strong bonds amongst themselves, and not like broing out, but they would sit and talk about their feelings. And it was really great for me to see, because I know when I was their age, that wasn't something guys did. Men and boys were not allowed to have those emotional bonds where they were allowed to feel their feelings. They just tell them to quit being gay, you know, like in the 90s and in the 2000s and that era, it was, you know, you weren't able to have those strong friendships. I mean, you could have the friendships, but like, I don't think there was always that kind of barrier there. Whereas girls make those bonds where, you know, those sisterly bonds and the friendships, and you can talk about your feelings, and men didn't really have that. So it's nice to see it evolve somewhat, but it definitely has a long way to go.
Well, and there's a backlash to that too, right? Where we've got this, there's a whole sort of in response to feminism, in response to this idea that men can emote, that they can have these deep, meaningful bonds with other people, with men, right? We have over feminized our society. We're becoming too weak. We're becoming too soft. I mean, there's a legitimate backlash out there. People wanting people to get tougher, wanting them to be, more not necessarily masculine, but, you know, back to that suck it up kind of culture, right? And it's everywhere, right? But I think social media is probably one of the worst of it, in that you get digital bullying, digital courage, right? People out there saying like that you just need to man up, right? I hate that phrase. Just man up, you know, put up with it. It's ridiculous. So some of that too is about vocabulary, and some of it's about language and what we allow to persist. So I'm just glad to know that at least in our little small corner of the universe, the three of us and our families are conscious of that vocabulary that we're using when we talk about these kinds of things. And then also recognizing it when we see it out in the wild too, and standing up for the people that are being victimized by it. Anything else to add on our conversation on patriarchy and banners and boundaries? We didn't talk a whole lot about boundaries today, other than to say, you know, that I think it's important to have that sense of self-worth and have that idea of who you are and be comfortable in that. So good job teaching your girls that, Casey, and teaching your boys that, Jessica. You know, keep on keeping on.
Thank you.
Anything else to add, Jess?
I don't think so.
Abstinence is a failed policy. Do not put any more government funding into it. All right, that's it.
It shouldn't be public policy anyway.
That's right. That's the end of the Libertarian Moms broadcast. Thanks for being with us. We'll be back next week.